Get some!
Welcome to TYT. I'm your host, Anna Kasparian, and this show is full of stories today that deal with lawmakers and government officials who use their position of power to enrich themselves, who are engaged in all sorts of corrupt acts. Yes, we will be discussing freshman Republican lawmaker George Santos and the over a dozen charges that have been filed against him by the Department of Justice. Later in the show, we'll also discuss how, despite everything we keep hearing from Clarence Thomas's supporters, the Supreme Court justice appears to have changed his mind on a pretty key decision he had made back in 2005 after receiving a ton of gifts from his billionaire benefactor. So we'll get to that later in the first hour as well. Also, remember that super weak sauce rule that was the result of Biden's push to allow for Medicare to negotiate drug prices? It was watered down to just 10 drugs that might be negotiated by the time we hit 2026. Well, pharmaceutical companies are currently on the warpath to scrap that. So we'll give you the details on how they're planning on doing it later in this hour as well. And possibly my favorite story of the day is how a woman has decided to use AI technology to maximize her profits. And she's a real thinker, she's an American hero. We'll tell you exactly what she's up to. I'm real curious to see if it's really gonna work out how she plans to. John Idarola, of course, will be joining me in the second hour as well. And as always, just want to encourage you guys to like and share the stream and become a member if you haven't already. Members help to keep us afloat, help to keep us independent of any corporate influence, and more importantly, give me the opportunity to run my mouth every day with impunity. So I love you for helping me do that. I'll always be grateful for that. tyt.com/join to become a member. With that said, let's get to one of the biggest stories of the day.
Republican Congressman George Santos is now in custody after turning himself in on federal criminal. He's facing 13 counts in total, stemming from wire fraud, money laundering, theft of public funds, and making false statements.
Wow, a Republican lawmaker found himself in federal custody briefly this morning. The Department of Justice has unsealed 13 federal charges against freshman Republican Representative George Santos. And the charges include 7 counts of wire fraud, 3 counts of money laundering, 1 count of theft of public funds, 2 counts of making materially false statements to the House of Representatives. The prosecutors allege that Santos solicited campaign funds under false pretenses and then proceeded to use the money on himself. Gee, I wonder where I've heard that before. I know we've heard quite a bit of accusations in regard to Donald Trump doing that. Now, the indictment accuses Santos of undertaking a fraudulent political contribution solicitation scheme where he set up a company and got supporters to contribute funds to it under the false pretense that the money would benefit his political campaign. Prosecutors claim that the thousands of dollars instead went to Santos's personal expenses, including luxury designer clothing and credit card payments. Wow, this is really shocking, guys. I mean, would anyone really expect this to come from a guy who defrauded an elderly man his mom was a caretaker for over in Brazil? Remember, he stole that person's identity and started making credit card charges using that person's identity? Should probably be extradited to face some charges in Brazil on that. Anyway, in addition to allegedly defrauding voters through the misuse of campaign funds, Santos is also accused of defrauding taxpayers through the pandemic-era unemployment insurance program. Though he claimed in the application he had been unemployed since March 2020, according to prosecutors, he was employed at an investment firm and as part of a $120,000 annual salary, he was allegedly receiving regular deposits with the exception of one period in July and August of 2020. He was employed at the firm between February 2020 and mid-April of 2021. But because of the repeated false assertions he is alleged to have made to the unemployment program, Santos also received close to $25,000 in benefits, according to prosecutors. Now, Santos was asked about these charges, and his response honestly was exactly what you'd expect from George Santos. Let's watch.
Why would you apply for unemployment benefits when you had a job making $120,000 a year?
Rachel, this is part of my defense. This is inaccurate information, and I will get to clear my name on this. During the pandemic, it wasn't very clear. I don't understand where the government's getting their information, but I will present my facts.
Prosecutors say that you got over $20,000 in unemployment benefits, sir. How is that acceptable?
Ma'am, like I said, my employment was changed during the time. I don't understand where the government's coming from. I'll present my defense.
My favorite part of that video is just the scene around him, including the guy with the phone who's just like, as the reporter's asking the question. It's so good. Anyway, Santos has also been accused of making false statements to the House of Representatives about the source of his income. In addition to all of this, the Republican lawmaker has allegedly been stealing cash meant for an Iraq war veteran's dying dog and masterminding a credit card fraud scheme. But it's unclear if the DOJ's charges against him have anything to do with those specific accusations. As CBS News reports, Santos has been under several investigations for several reasons.
FBI is probing his pet charity, and the Securities and Exchange Commission inquired about his work for Harbor City Capital, a financial firm that was running a Ponzi scheme. And in March, the House Ethics Committee opened an investigation into Santos's financial disclosure forms and whether he violated federal conflict of interest laws.
How can you effectively do your job?
In January, Santos removed himself from committee assignments and was defiant.
Are you confident that you will be cleared?
Yes, I am.
Why? Why are you confident you'll be cleared?
I'll be cleared because I have nothing to hide.
If you have nothing to hide, why do you think you're under investigation?
I gotta say, George Santos reminds me a lot of Anna Delvey, where it's like everything around him is just melting down and he can't help himself. He's like, I told you already, okay? The wire transfer is on the way. Mr. Santos, are you really planning to run for re-election? Of course I am. I told you already. The re-election campaign is on the way. Now, Santos's indictment comes just one day after former President Donald Trump was found guilty in a, civil case. He was found guilty of sexually battering and defaming writer E. Jean Carroll in a civil trial. And this is clearly not a good look for the Republican Party as a whole. And so far, the House GOP has even refused to expel Santos despite his shady track record and possible financial crimes. But what are they saying now? Now that this freshman lawmaker and likely con man has been indicted and arrested, have they changed their tune? Well, New York state lawmakers have been pretty good in condemning him, but House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, not so much.
Federal prosecutors filed charges against the congressman in the Eastern District of New York.
Well, there's a clock ticking.
Renewing calls from many of his New York Republican colleagues to resign.
George Santos should have resigned in December. He should have resigned in January. He should have resigned yesterday, and maybe he'll resign today. But sooner or later, honesty and justice will be delivered to him.
Santos was notably absent from House floor voting Tuesday night, and Speaker Kevin McCarthy suggested support for the freshman congressman is limited if he's found guilty.
If a person is indicted, they're not on committees, they have the right to vote, but they have to go to trial.
By the way, Santos is definitely planning to continue voting on legislation even though he's been indicted. It's wild. Now, other Republicans were a little stronger in their willingness to denounce Santos. Representative Steve Womack argues he needs to resign immediately, telling CNN that Republicans, quote, don't need these distractions. This has been going on now since we took the majority. Frankly, I would have hoped along the way that Mr. Santos would have done what I believe was the right thing. And of course, if leadership forces action, but for him to do it on his own, meaning resign. Republican Congressman Blake Moore wants to wait for the conclusion of an ethics investigation, even though the DOJ's findings were enough to bring federal charges against Santos. He said, quote, let the ethics investigation play out, and if it produces anything, he should be removed. But my favorite statement came from Representative Ryan Zinke, another Republican, who came out strong against Santos and said that he would be on board with expulsion if the ethics committee reached that conclusion. He also told CNN that, quote, the ethics committee better move on it. We owe American people answers. It seems like as they go down the journey, the charges get more serious. They're serious enough. I'm surprised he's still here. Now, that wasn't my favorite statement due to its substance, but rather how insane it is that Zinke of all people is saying it. What stands out about this story is just how deeply ingrained corruption and criminality is in our system of government. For example, you probably didn't know that Zinke faced 12.5 federal investigations himself while he was part of the Trump administration. Much of what he was accused of was basically using his position of power for self-dealing. You can read about those investigations in a pretty detailed 2018 piece by Citizens for Ethics titled "A Guide to the 18 Federal Investigations into Zinke." I highly recommend you guys do that. Now, the behavior in question occurred while Zinke served as Trump's Interior Secretary for a little under 2 years, beginning in March of 2017. Somehow, the Montana lawmaker managed to face 18 federal investigations during that short period of time. But to be fair, he was cleared of wrongdoing in some of those investigations. But many were deemed inconclusive due to Zinke's unwillingness to cooperate with investigators.
The most recent IG report concerns allegations that Zinke tried to secure free travel for his wife in government vehicles. Any non-government employee is supposed to reimburse the government for those kinds of trips, but Zinke allegedly tried to get his wife a volunteer job at the department so she could travel with him for free. Zinke has repeatedly denied any wrongdoing. The secretary is also being investigated separately for a few different matters, including his involvement in a land deal in Montana that could benefit Zinke and his wife, Zinke's reversal of a decision to grant a casino in Connecticut after meeting with lobbyists from a different casino operator, and his decision to redraw the boundaries of 2 national monuments.
Wow, that land deal is a bit of an issue, no? We should probably learn more about it.
This land deal in Whitefish, Montana, can you explain a little bit about what that question is about?
Sure, there's a development in Whitefish called 95 Caro, which involves the chairman of Halliburton, a major oil services firm, which is potentially affected by interior decisions, as well as a local developer and the Zinkes, because the land that they have both donated to the town as well as adjacent property that they own could be affected by the development. Secretary Zinke, who stepped down as president from the foundation and handed the reins to his wife, has been involved in discussions and even a meeting with David Lazar, his son, and this developer while in office here in Washington, and that is now the subject of an Inspector General probe.
Usually lawmakers don't release statements or call for investigations of other corrupt lawmakers because they're worried that in doing so, it'll draw attention to their own criminality and their own corruption. But Zinke isn't even smart enough to do that. It blows my mind. Anyway, that land deal investigation was never concluded. The last we heard about it was in May of 2020 when Zinke whined about it in an interview with the Washington Examiner. Other ongoing investigations include claims that he blocked a casino deal involving native tribes after, of course, meeting with MGM lobbyists. Zinke's corruption had apparently been so brazen that even members of his own corrupt party wanted to investigate him. Following reports that the Interior Department would spend nearly $139,000 to replace 3 sets of doors, House Oversight Committee Chairman Trey Gowdy got involved. He requested a briefing from the Interior Department on plans to replace the doors, as well as documentation of the purchase. Now, all of these accusations and investigations led to Zinke stepping down as Interior Secretary on December 15th of 2018. But he ran for a congressional seat in Montana's 1st District and narrowly beat Democrat Monica Tranel in the 2022 midterm election. So it's difficult to celebrate George Santos possibly facing consequences for his actions when we all know lawmakers like Zinke can get away with using their power to enrich themselves and their corporate donors. And remember, we still have members of Congress engaging what definitely appears to be insider trading with impunity. This isn't to take away from the Santos news. I don't want to be a Debbie Downer. But viewers and listeners should ask themselves why some politicians with way less power, like freshman lawmakers, face the music while others don't. And despite the criminal indictments, even Santos is planning to somehow cash in on this with possible lucrative projects.
You look.
Go ahead.
You look pretty stressed. When I saw you sit down and the judge first started speaking, what was going through your mind? What are you feeling after being in court today?
Well, when it's your first time experiencing something of this nature, I think everybody would show some kind of stress, right? I quite frankly don't believe I was stressed. I did the best I could to just keep my composure. I was fine. But again, this has been an experience, for a book or something like that.
This has been an experience for a book or something like that. I mean, always scheming. Gotta respect the hustle, right? Jeez, it's incredible. But the only person's hustle I really respect in this story is that incredible reporter who just popped up out of nowhere to ask a question and confront Santos about how nervous he looked. That's the real winner in this entire scenario. Look at her. She's about, I gotta ask you a question. I gotta ask you why you look so nervous. You're playing it cool, but I know what's really going on here. That was so good. Anyway, we'll tell you how this all plays out as we learn more about the criminal indictments. This is a pretty big deal. And while I do have, some downer elements to this story that I've shared with you, I will say it does feel good to see at least some people in positions of power facing consequences for their actions. Let's take a break. When we come back, we have more for you, including a pretty incredible story about, how Democrats are attacking DeSantis for the wrong reason. So believe it or not, I'm gonna defend something that DeSantis did recently. That and more coming up. Ice cream. Welcome to our first social break of the day. Lots of comments to get to. Axel the Ghost says in our super chat section, we need Bye Bye Santos t-shirts ASAP. I'm pretty sure Shop TYT will fulfill that request. So check it out. They already have a ton of really great merch over at Shop TYT, but I would not be surprised if we created some t-shirts that make fun of Santos and celebrate the fact that he's facing some consequences here. BO writes in and says, yes, it was not Santos, but Delvey who said, you think that there was some evolution, like in the movies or whatever, but I was always who I am, LOL, it's hilarious. We have Jason Ray who writes it and says, but Hunter, y'all, I know the press conference with Santos was ridiculous because he immediately wanted to deflect and make all sorts of accusations toward Hunter Biden. Or, by the way, like investigate all of them, I don't really care, but we're here to talk about what you engaged in, Santos. And of course, he didn't really want to talk about that. He tried to play it cool. I recommend watching the entirety of that press conference when you get a chance, obviously after the show, because it was kind of hilarious to see him try to spin things in real time. All right, let's go to our YouTube members. Jokey Smurf says, Anna, I love it when you run your mouth. Fantastic, I'm glad you're here because that's exactly what I plan to do for the rest of the show. Christina Brown writes in and says, I love Anna's makeup, perfect, thank you so much. Dave Ide says, the best impression ever. I'm guessing that's the Anna Delvey impression. The Half Black Reaper asks a really good question, and I should have maybe spent a little bit of time clarifying this in the segment. So the question is, unemployment maxes out at about $500 a week in my state. How'd he even get more than $20,000 in unemployment benefits? He did it at a time when the federal government was like bolstering state unemployment amounts, right? So if you can remember, I don't remember the exact amount. If I recall correctly, it was like an additional $300 a week on top of what your state provides in unemployment benefits. So I think that's the reason why he fraudulently collected as much money, allegedly fraudulently collected as much as he did. Don Whitehead says, Anna, it would be a sad day if you weren't allowed to speak your mind. Love you for it. Thank you so much, Don. And Chris writes in, thank you for being a member for 18 months, Chris. This is in our YouTube section. Thank you, TYT. Been watching, wow, since late 2000s. That's pretty incredible. All right, wow, we got 30 seconds left. Let's go to our Twitch community where Anna, your hair looks great, Dragon, gifted a tier 1 sub. Thank you so much for that. Killa says, so this is why the Republicans are harping on Hunter Biden today because of Santos. 1000%. This is what they do, distract, deflect, don't take ownership of the wrongdoing within our own party. We see it all the time. With that said, though, I'm about to defend DeSantis, kind of. Don't miss it, we'll be right back. Welcome back to the show, everyone. I'm your host, Anna Kasparian. And I think it's important to be fair to everyone, including politicians that we dislike. And to be sure, I am not a fan of Florida Governor Ron DeSantis at all. However, there is something that he's getting some criticism for that I disagree with, and I want to tell you what it's about. So let's talk about it. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has signed new legislation this week that prevents foreign nationals in 7 countries from purchasing what the state considers sensitive land. Now, in an effort to market this as some sort of heroic war against communism and US adversaries, the Florida GOP is barring citizens of Russia, Iran, North Korea, Cuba, Venezuela, and Syria from buying farmland or any property within 10 miles of a military installation, seaport, or airport. Here's DeSantis announcing the new rules with his trademark uncharismatic delivery.
The legislation, SB 264, will prohibit the purchase of farmland in Florida by the CCP and other foreign countries of concern because we believe protecting our food supply is a security issue, and we want to make sure that our agriculture land is not compromised by CCP influence. Now, the prohibition in that bill is not just limited to farmland. It also includes land within 10 miles of any military installation or any type of critical infrastructure.
Okay, look, I know this is just posturing for DeSantis. He's trying to improve his chances of winning the Republican primary for the 2024 election, and I think it's pretty obvious. But there's more to this new law in Florida that Democrats have misguidedly attacked him for. And for the purposes of this discussion, I want to focus on that. As Axios reports, people from China who are not US citizens or lawful permanent residents will be barred from owning Florida property altogether. Anyone knowingly selling land in violation of the new regulations is liable to civil and criminal penalties. The legislation also creates a mechanism for the property to be forfeited to the state. Now, what's interesting is that very last line about the property possibly being forfeited to the state is something that makes some Republican voters uneasy. They're worried that that could be a slippery slope that grants too much power to the government. But other than that, they're like, yeah, we're totally on board with this. To be fair, I'm on board with it to some extent as well, and I'll explain why. What this means is that Chinese nationals who do not live in the United States, along with China-based corporations, will not have the ability to buy any property in the state of Florida, and that includes housing. Considering we're in the midst of a housing shortage and crisis, I have no problem with that. But our well-to-do friends over at Morning Joe think leaving our limited housing supply vulnerable to private global investors, some of whom are looking to launder money, by the way, is somehow more important.
Republicans are supposed to support free markets. Exactly. They're supposed to support free enterprise with Disney, with cruise lines, with small businesses. Like this is about as overarching big government, socialist government as I've seen.
You just take an objective look at, okay, why has this economy in this country managed to stay on top for so long? And obviously, openness is obviously the reason. It's the big factor. Our openness to immigration, our openness to all kinds of free trade.
What? Okay, first off, this has nothing to do with immigration and free trade. A little bit of a mixed bag. Actually, a lot of negative outcomes for American workers as a result of free trade. But really, we came out on top because we allowed foreign nationals to buy up our housing and price us out of the housing market. Okay. Now, Democrats argue that the new rules in Florida are discriminatory against Chinese nationals. And you know what? I do agree with that take. So my only complaint toward Florida's new policy is that it would have been far better if DeSantis and Florida state legislature expanded the ban to include all foreign nationals. For me, this isn't about attacking China or any other specific foreign country. It's about protecting Americans who have to live here and can't afford housing due to housing shortages. The problem is DeSantis doesn't really care about the economic impact foreign investors have on the housing market. They're just ratcheting up adversarial rhetoric and policy toward China, which Democrats, by the way, are also pretty guilty of. However, foreign nationals buying up our extremely limited inventory of housing is a problem. Politicians in Canada, for instance, noticed how much of an issue it was in their own country and have taken action by limiting foreign investment to address skyrocketing housing prices. In fact, some argue that they haven't done enough in Canada. But let's get back to the United States. In the US, Congress has allowed this practice to continue to the detriment of the American people. Back in April of 2021, we shared a Wall Street Journal story with you that discovered foreign investors accounting for nearly a third of institutional investment in single-family rental homes. I mean, you think having a landlord in another state is bad? Imagine if they lived in another country. At the time, German insurer Allianz was investing in a venture to buy more than like $4 billion of US rental homes. Then there's Singapore, like Singapore's sovereign wealth fund known as GIC was also backing a plan to purchase single family rentals across southeastern US. And the journal accurately concluded that, quote, the recent growth of foreign investment means that individual home buyers must increasingly contend with this deep-pocketed group of purchasers in a number of prime US neighborhoods, boosting prices there and adding more fuel to a housing boom that is already the hottest in 14 years. Now that was back in 2021. Things haven't gotten any better since then. From April of 2021 through March of 2022, foreign investors bought $59 billion worth of existing homes in the United States, an 8.5% increase from the previous 12-month period, stopping a 3-year skid in foreign investment in the United States residential real estate. And that slowdown in foreign investment occurred at the beginning of the pandemic, but lately, we're seeing an uptick in foreign investment yet again. Now, what makes it even more difficult for Americans to compete with foreign investors is that while most of us need to apply for a mortgage to, finance the purchase of our home, foreign nationals actually like to make all cash offers, and you can't really compete with that. Between April of 2021 and March of 2022, all cash sales accounted for a whopping 60% of non-resident foreign buyers. They've got the deep pockets. That includes 58% of Chinese buyers. And despite the popular notion that these wealthy foreign nationals are focusing their investments in the luxury housing market, the reality is that they're buying up homes that were historically purchased by middle-class families. According to the National Association of Realtors, the median price of the homes foreign investors are buying is around $366,000. Now that's still a lot of money, but remember, the price of housing has really skyrocketed in this country to the point where $366,000 is a reasonable price for a home. Florida, which has experienced a pretty sharp increase in housing prices, has definitely been impacted by this. For the 14th straight year, Florida remained the top destination luring foreign buyers, accounting for 24% of all international purchases. California ranked second at 11%, followed by Texas at 8%, Arizona at 7%, and New York and North Carolina tied at 4%. But what about Chinese investors specifically, the one group that DeSantis has decided to ban from buying residential real estate in Florida? Well, Chinese buyers accounted for 6% of all foreign US residential real estate purchases from April 2021 to March of 2022, according to the National Association of Realtors. Buyers from China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan spent $6.1 billion on those deals. China and Canada, by the way, remained first and second in US residential sales dollar volume at 6.1 billion and 5.5 billion respectively, continuing a trend going back to 2013. And they tend to buy the pricier homes in other states. So at just over 1 million, Chinese buyers had the highest average purchase price and nearly a third, 31% purchase property in California. Now, couple this foreign investment trend with private equity firms and institutional investors buying up entire neighborhoods of residential properties, and we're dealing with a pretty despicable and outrageously unaffordable housing market.
Found that for housing vouchers, which are local subsidies helping renters find homes on the private market, the average wait in San Diego County is 8 years. And for public housing, it has the longest wait time of any large metropolitan county in the entire US.
In San Diego County, the wait list for public housing is over 18 years. We're just not building public housing like we used to. We're not providing enough housing vouchers for people to use on the private market. Today, what we're seeing is a housing crisis unlike one that we've seen since the mid-20th century.
That's right. So if there is limited supply, and there absolutely is, why are we letting people who don't even live here buy housing as an investment? And look, don't get me wrong, banning foreign investment would not solve America's housing crisis. It would just tackle one factor contributing to it. Institutional investors should also be banned, in the very least temporarily, until we build more housing. But what kind of housing we build is also incredibly important. Look, it's not hard to find new luxury developments in a big city near you. No one can afford those units. The Biden administration and the entirety of the Democratic Party should have gotten busy building public housing as soon as Biden got elected. Instead, much like DeSantis, they just engage in political tit-for-tat nonsense that really does nothing to alleviate the economic pain felt by their constituents. And so there's a lot to criticize Governor DeSantis on. Banning foreign investment in real estate, particularly residential real estate, just isn't one of them. All right, let's move on to something entirely different. Let's talk about the ongoing reporting regarding the corruption within the Supreme Court. This story by The Lever is incredible. It's lengthy, it's very detailed. I highly recommend you guys read it for yourselves. But we're gonna try to help you digest what we've learned through this reporting, because it's really important to know what this corruption translates to. The Clarence Thomas corruption scandal is the story that just never ends. It's the gift that keeps on giving. It turns out that Justice Thomas reversed one of his positions on one of the country's most significant regulatory decisions after his wife Ginny allegedly accepted secret payments from conservative donors, and while he himself was receiving extravagant gifts and luxury vacations from billionaire Harlan Crow. Now, to understand how corruption is at play here, we need context on this legal doctrine in question, which is known as the Chevron doctrine. According to The Lever, the so-called Chevron deference doctrine stipulates that the executive branch, not the federal courts, has the power to interpret laws passed by Congress in certain circumstances. Conservatives for years have fought to overturn the doctrine, a move that would empower legal challenges to federal agency regulations on everything from climate policy to workplace safety to overtime pay. So it was the result of the 1984 Supreme Court case, Chevron USA v. Natural Resources Defense Council, which was brought by environmental advocates to challenge Reagan's weakening of air pollution regulations. The Supreme Court deferred to the EPA and its interpretation of the Clean Air Act, which at the time was seen as a win for the polluters. But it was also a win for the administrative state or federal government agencies, which is why conservatives hated it. Now, Thomas wrote a landmark Supreme Court opinion upholding the doctrine in 2005, but began questioning it a decade later before eventually renouncing his past opinion in 2020 and claiming that the doctrine itself might be unconstitutional. Now Thomas could help overturn the doctrine in a new case the High Court just agreed to hear next term. And what do you know? Groups within the conservative legal movement, which includes right-wing donors Leonard Leo and Harlan Crow, have orchestrated an effort in recent years to overturn the decision. What a shocker. They hate that the doctrine empowers federal agencies like the EPA or even the Education Department to interpret and implement statutes. Maybe Clarence just happened to change his mind out of nowhere, or maybe not. I'm gonna go with the latter. So in 2010, Harlan Crow bankrolled a dark money group led by Thomas's wife, Ginny, that paid her $120,000. Leo was on the group's board of directors. In 2012, Leo's dark money network steered undisclosed consulting payments to Thomas's wife. Oh, I'm sure that had no impact, not at all. Now, the Leo network has also aggressively funded Republican politicians and several nonprofits, pressing the Supreme Court to overturn the Chevron doctrine next term. The Federalist Society, of course, the conservative lawyers organization where Leonard Leo is co-chair, was at the center of these efforts, publishing articles and touting theories undermining the Chevron doctrine and the administrative state. The American Enterprise Institute, where Harlan Crow sits on the board of trustees, was also agitating against the Chevron doctrine. Harlan Crow co-founded the Club for Growth, which has a very funny name, but nonetheless, it's a pro-business group that also issued a memo calling for the end of the Chevron doctrine. Last year, Crow's wife joined the board of trustees at the Manhattan Institute, a conservative think tank that pressed the Supreme Court to hear the new case aimed at ending the Chevron doctrine. This is the family that brought Clarence Thomas on vacations worth $500,000 and also paid for their relatives' private school tuition. But it's not just Clarence Thomas that was very likely corrupted by the gifts and cash of powerful conservatives, which he didn't disclose and he was supposed to. Like any good political donor, Harlan Crow also targeted members of Congress. And it's paying off. Now, in the midst of this ethics scandal, the Senate Judiciary Committee held a hearing on Supreme Court ethics and sent a letter asking Harlan Crow to provide a full accounting of his financial ties to Thomas and any other judges on the high court. Now, unsurprisingly, none of the committee's Republican members signed on to the letter. Oh, and we should maybe mention that those same Republicans have collectively accepted nearly $500,000 in campaign cash from Crow since the year 2000. Accountable.us calculated that the current Republican members of the Senate Judiciary Committee received $453,300 from Crow between 2001 and 2022. The group revised that figure up to $457,000 on Tuesday in light of, oh, look at that, another $3,700 donation Crow made to Senator John Cornyn, a Republican from Texas, earlier this year. So let's break that down a little further, okay? I love getting into the numbers. Here's a look at Crow's total contributions to 9 GOP lawmakers on the panel. You've got John Cornyn at $294,800. You've got Senator Chuck Grassley, $46,000, $46,600. I mean, it's just a murderer's row of insanely corrupt Republican lawmakers who are more than willing to do the bidding of Harlan Crow, the Federalist Society, and anything that they want, basically, right? And in this case, they want to take power away from federal government agencies and essentially consolidate power within the Supreme Court. And look, they've been pretty vocal. All of those lawmakers who took those donations or bribes, let's keep it real, they've been vocal in opposing reforms to the Supreme Court and the ethics that they're supposed to be operating under. Now, Senator John Kennedy said the proposed Supreme Court ethics rules were unnecessary. Senator John Cornyn claimed Congress did not have the authority to regulate the courts due to separation of powers. Senator Ted Cruz claimed the hearing was not about judicial ethics, but instead was an attempt to attack Justice Thomas for having rich friends. Now, he can have all the rich friends in the world. I don't care about that. I do care when the rich friends are bribing him so he rules in a particular way. And that is what appears to be happening here. And it's all coming full circle because that kind of political corruption was legalized in this country in part thanks to Crow's buddy, Clarence Thomas. An Americans for Tax Fairness analysis of campaign finance data showed that after Thomas provided a deciding vote in the Citizens United v. Federal Election Commission case, the Crow family's average annual campaign contributions soared by 862% from just $163,240 before 2010 to $1.57 million since. Just let that sink in. And we're supposed to believe that our system of government is sound, that corruption isn't a problem. We're supposed to sit here and accept whatever narrative comes from our elected lawmakers in regard to the corruption in other countries, when we know full well that not only is corruption a problem in our country, but we've taken the extra step. The Supreme Court has taken the extra step of legalizing the bribery and baking it into our system. Now, Justice Thomas failed to disclose the lavish gifts and all the luxury travel that was provided to him from billionaire donor Harlan Crow. And we should be asking ourselves, why is that? Why did he have so much difficulty disclosing that information while simultaneously disclosing the gifts and money that he received from other individuals? A little questionable, no? Anyway, speaking of corruption, we're not done with that topic because pharmaceutical companies are already on the warpath to do away with incredibly weak sauce regulation that would allow for Medicare to negotiate drug prices on a limited number of pharmaceutical drugs. That story and more coming right up.
Ice cream.
Welcome back to our not bonus episode. What's wrong with me? I'm already like, I'm ready to wrap up the day, just keeping it real. That's probably why my head is in the bonus episode section of the show, even though we haven't even done the second hour. Anyway, TYT members, we've got John Campbell, who writes in and says, but Santos will still try to represent his district from his cell in Rikers Island. He might go to prison. Like, the charges against him carry a maximum 20 years in prison, each charge. So the likelihood, if he's found guilty, the likelihood of spending some time behind bars is pretty high, actually. I would bet money on it. We'll see. Weird Al Dragonovich says he never said he was unemployed. He meant he was unemployed-ish. I believe it is my opinion that he wanted to defraud US taxpayers and collect unemployment that he had no business collecting. That money was meant to help people. Remember, beginning of the pandemic, more than 10 million Americans were laid off. And this guy was trying to pocket money that was not meant for him. It's just absolutely disgusting. Eclectic Miscellanea says George Santos is trying his damnedest to surpass Trump as the biggest liar in American political history. I mean, that is a difficult goal, and he might beat it. We'll see. We've got Hung Jun, who says Santos is proof that fake it until you make it is not a real thing. I mean, it depends on the context. This ain't the right context. I mean, he's been caught in so many lies. No one believes anything he's saying. Mickey C, the Silverhead Dragon says, I'm fine with DeSantis barring corporations from buying land and homes, but only if the same applies to American corporations. Couldn't agree more. I think both should be banned. And by the way, when it comes to banning, foreign investment, I'm even willing to have a conversation about lifting that ban should we have ample housing for Americans. But we're nowhere near that. So that's where I'm at with that. SM Volunteer says, we have Saudi Arabia owning land in Arizona. They are growing alfalfa for export, not to mention they are using our water. Sounds like a bit of a problem. It's just so frustrating how much we have opened up the country for others to like rape and pillage while Americans are struggling and suffering. It's incredibly frustrating. Sully says, we had similar issues in New Zealand concerning foreigners buying our houses and not living in them. Our government adjusted the purchase of homes by foreigners to the benefit of our country, still facing the impact of our housing issues. Our highest buyers are from Western countries. Really interesting perspective there, and I love that you shared that with us. And yeah, this is a problem that many other countries are dealing with, grappling with. There are housing crises in other countries as well. I didn't know about New Zealand though, so thank you for sharing that with us. All right, let's get back to the show. show, everyone. Lots more news to get to. Let's focus a little bit on our healthcare industry, starting with pharmaceutical companies. Pharmaceutical companies are already plotting ways to circumvent new regulations that would allow for Medicare to negotiate the prices of a very limited number of drugs. Now, the policy was the outcome of Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, or the end result of the severely watered down version of his Build Back Better agenda. You know, that agenda that the president couldn't be bothered to fight for. But nonetheless, the original legislation would have allowed for Medicare to negotiate the prices of all pharmaceutical drugs. But the final version that passed both chambers of Congress when Democrats controlled the levers of power was far weaker. The first ever Medicare drug price reduction process actually begins in September, when the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, identifies its 10 most costly drugs. Following negotiations on that first wave of drugs, new prices will go into effect in 2026, when the agency could cut $4.8 billion in industry sales. And the $4.8 billion is in regard to the lower prices that get negotiated as a result of this new deal, this new rule that was passed by Congress. Now, it's a limited number of drugs, and it won't go into effect until 2026. And this only impacts Medicare recipients. Cool. Now, in all fairness, while the regulation is laughably weak, the drugs that are likely to be negotiated are very important ones. So the blood thinner, Eliquis, from Bristol Myers Squibb and Pfizer, Pfizer's breast cancer drug, Ibrance, and AbbVie's leukemia treatment are likely to be among 10 big selling medicines subject to the negotiations. Okay, let's just pause for a second. Pharmaceutical companies don't even want the Medicare system to have the ability to negotiate drug prices. How is that the free market? How is that not crony capitalism? It's so incredibly disgusting, and make no mistake about it. The reason why the original regulation, the original proposal was watered down to the extent that it was watered down is because both Democrats and Republicans are bought by these pharmaceutical companies. So they're gonna do the bidding of the pharmaceutical companies. So they weakened the bill. They passed a watered down version of the original proposal, and pharmaceutical companies are still not satisfied. Even that pathetically weak law upsets pharmaceutical companies. I mean, so much so that they're already on the warpath to destroy it. 6 sources with ties to Big Pharma spoke to Reuters on condition of anonymity, and here's what they said. 3 industry lobbyists and lawyers said that unless Medicare changes its proposals before it finalizes them in July, drug makers will likely file lawsuits arguing that the agency is not complying with Biden's legislation nor the US Constitution. What? Okay, so they're just gonna do lawsuits to drag this out, drag out the implementation, and potentially work their way to the Supreme Court, which will very likely strike it down. Now, 5 of the world's top drug makers have already raised legal concerns with the law and the agency's proposed roadmap. 6 sources said factors involving whether a drug is considered eligible for negotiation may also contradict and unlawfully extend the law's provisions. In particular, they said the definition of a single source drug sets too high a bar on whether a drug has competition. There are other regulations that are likely to be challenged by pharmaceutical companies. For example, Reuters reports that Medicare's guidance includes rules banning drug makers from publicly discussing the negotiations and imposes fines of $1 million a day for violations. Now, I'm really curious why pharmaceutical companies have a problem with that. Is it because it would prevent them from lobbying and publicly speaking about it? Now, those could be challenged under the US Constitution's First and Eighth Amendments protecting freedom of speech and against excessive fines, respectively, said 3 sources representing drug makers. There are delay tactics involved too. So drug companies could file for emergency injunctions to delay government negotiations, according to one lawyer who represents multiple manufacturers. The lawsuits are more than just a tactic to delay the implementation of new drug negotiation rules. As Juliet Kubansky from Kaiser Family Foundation put it, litigation, if successful, would notch another win for an industry that has enjoyed many years of success in blocking legislative proposals it opposes. So what really stands out to me in regard to this story, other than the insane greed that we have come to expect from pharmaceutical companies, is that unless we do away with the virus in our political system, unless we do away with the corruption, unless we do away with the legalized bribery that allows for these pharmaceutical companies to pad the pockets of our lawmakers, they're always gonna get their way. They're gonna take Supreme Court justices on lavish trips. They're gonna bribe our judicial system in those ways. They're gonna bribe our members of Congress in other ways through campaign donations. I mean, that's baked into our system at this point. And at the end of the day, they're gonna get what they want because they have paid handsomely to get what they want. So how exactly is that a democracy? And by the way, what the hell is the point of being a member of Congress when your work means nothing? When even the pathetic, watered down garbage that comes out of Congress can be squashed immediately by the court system. I mean, imagine looking back at your life as a United States lawmaker and feeling proud of what you've accomplished. Because fact of the matter is, Congress can't really accomplish much these days, especially if they're trying to rein in corporate greed. So when lawmakers talk about their legacy, when they obsess about their legacy, what they should know is that as long as money in politics continues to be a problem, their legacy means nothing. They're just puppets for corporate America, including pharmaceutical companies who love to take taxpayer money in the form of research and development and then turn around and price gouge us the second we need those medications to stay alive. That's what this country really operates under. We're not being ruled or governed by the people we've elected. The people who actually call the shots in America are corporate executives, are shareholders, and are people who stand to profit off of deregulation and all sorts of corporate goodies. It is unbelievable that even that weak sauce legislation has gotten the pharmaceutical companies' panties in a bunch. But that's where they're at, because God forbid they lose even a tiny bit of profit while more Americans are able to access the drugs they desperately need to stay alive. All right, we gotta take a break. When we come back, John Adirola will join me for just nonsense. Lots of nonsense in the news today, including Elon Musk, going in the Alex Jones direction of calling one of the latest mass shootings a psyop. And Marsha Blackburn apparently not knowing a single detail of what happened in Uvalde, Texas. That and more coming up.
The rest of the news media says you should not fight for positive change. If you do, you're not really a reporter or a journalist, because reporters and journalists don't care what happens. I don't agree. That's not written anywhere. That's not a law. It's just a rule that they invented so that reporters didn't actually challenge the people that are in power. Well, we don't agree with that. We think we should challenge the people in power, that actually makes you a better journalist, not a worse one.
Here at the Young Turks, we do our best to bring you the most essential news stories of the day, but we can't cover everything in a 2-hour show. And for the rest, I recommend Ground News. Founded by a former NASA scientist, Ground News uses a revolutionary system that analyzes where the news is coming from and gives you complete transparency on the potential biases these sources may have. That way you can read between the lines of media bias and break free from the corporate media agenda. In arming you with the context and transparency, you'll have everything you need to think critically about the news and build responsible media literacy for yourself and others. With Ground News, you're not just mindlessly consuming the media, you're part of a movement that is working to hold them accountable and get straight to the facts. Break through the filter bubbles, the propaganda, and the bias, and subscribe to Ground News today.
Here's something you may not know. When you deposit your money in a big bank, it doesn't just sit, safe and secure, in a vault. Instead, your money could end up building oil pipelines, mining for coal, or drilling in the Arctic. So if you're concerned about the planet, give your money something good to do. Make the move to green with Aspiration's fossil fuel-free account and join the thousands each week who are switching to save their dollars and save the planet at the same time.
I got pulled in. They told me, hey, listen, Cenk, we're insiders. We are the establishment. People in Washington tell me that they're concerned about your tone. We think that there's a better role for you, and it's not in 6 o'clock. The problem with the mainstream media is they're desperate to get access. They don't challenge the government. They don't challenge power. We're supposed to challenge the government. That's the role of the media.
Components that corrupt our politicians, I think, also corrupt mainstream media. It's really difficult for cable outlets to talk about things like income inequality, wealth inequality, when the advertisers that are funding their shows are the same corporations that want to ensure that the same system continues. People watch digital media or new media, they get a completely different message. They focus on the issues that matter or resonate more with the constituency. We need to know one thing. Is the corporate media incompetent?
Corporate media, I can't hear you. Establishment press, where are you? I can't hear you. But the media's position I am clear on. Everything is pro-war, so everything is just framed that way. In this case, I mean, war is inevitable, right? I mean, the defense contractors should get a couple more $1 trillion. You ready for the stunning results? Only 6% of people say they have a great deal of confidence in the press. Wakey, wakey, okay? Progressives don't like the media either. You know why? It's the corporate media. Corporate media sounds like a conspiracy. Wait. Who owns you? Multi-billion-dollar corporations, public corporations. You have to fear corporate media because corporations own us. Yeah, that's how it works. We found the perfect person to lead the army, Allison Hartson.
The establishment media works hand in glove with our corporate legislators, and our corporate legislators work hand in glove with the corporation. And we're going to make it so that it's a decentralized force throughout the country so that we can quickly identify stories, quickly identify troll farms, and go in and neutralize the enemy, and then start building responsible media throughout the country and on every platform available.
That is enough with this segment, John. We have to go to break.
Ice cream.
Everyone, welcome back to the show. Anna Kasparian and John Iadarola with you. I get giddy when you're here, John.
I'm excited.
I am too.
I get giddy when I'm around me too.
There's a story today that I specifically wanted to cover with you because it involves AOC, and it also involves someone that we both dislike defending AOC.
Yeah, but Cenk's not here to defend himself, so I think that we should leave. Kidding. Yes, I'm familiar with the story, having read the rundown, but I do like it.
I always do appreciate it when my co-hosts read the rundown, read the stories that we want to talk about.
We're mixing it up, you know?
Yeah, I know, it's a little different from what usually happens. Anyway, with that said, without further ado, let's talk about it. AOC was, as always, recently berated on Fox News. This time it was in the context of the panel over at the 5 going on this weird, bizarre rant about AOC and Matt Gaetz getting married. But there's a twist to this story because Matt Gaetz, of all people, jumps in to defend Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Now, before we get to that, I do think it's important to give you context. Like, why did this weird, bizarre conversation happen on the 5 in the first place? Well, it actually has to do with legislation that, believe it or not, Gaetz and Ocasio-Cortez are working on together, having to do with members of Congress trading individual stocks, something that I care deeply about. So the reason that Matt Gaetz and AOC have been in the news together lately is because they have teamed up to try to pass this legislation that would put an end to insider trading within the House of Representatives, or Congress actually in general. Now, the bipartisan Restoring Faith in Government Act would prevent all members of Congress, so in the House and the Senate, as well as their spouses and dependents, from owning stocks or making trades, so individual stocks, of course. So any violations of the bill could result in a fine at the court's discretion up to $50,000. And just seeing how the courts usually work out here in the United States in response to people in positions of power, they probably will not get a $50,000 fine. But nonetheless, there is an enforcement mechanism in this legislation, which is great. Now, it surprised all of us to see Matt Gaetz and AOC team up, but I want to be clear about something. I personally have no problem with members of Congress from both sides of the aisle coming together to pass legislation that we desperately need. And in this case, rooting out some of the corruption within Congress by preventing them from trading individual stocks would be fantastic. Now, with that said, let's get to the 5 and their weird fan fiction fantasies.
I smell a romantic comedy. Oh. A beautiful left-wing communist in Congress, a dashing right-wing male fresh off a wrongful accusation of sexual misconduct. They come together to fight one of the most corrupt practices in politics, and they fall in love. They can't help themselves. She's got a French poodle, he's got a strange hairline, but somehow they're gonna make it work. And then they're gonna leave politics and start their own business. It'll be like a vegan bakery for pets.
He's happily married.
A vegan bakery. No, he's gonna leave her.
No, he's not. Ginger's
not married.
He's married. He's married.
And don't ruin her.
In this story, can I marry them?
Yes, you will be married.
What was that? What was that?
Strokes come in a lot of different forms. The warning signs can be subtle. Sometimes they're more explicit.
Okay, obviously we're gonna jump into the substance if there is any in a moment, but
we're gonna break our legs on the bottom of where the substance should be, but
I gotta say, like, there's a lot to criticize Matt Gaetz on. His hairline isn't one of those things, and it's rich coming from a guy who increasingly looks like Gollum as he ages. But nonetheless, John,
Gollum was a tragic figure, you well know.
Just like Greg Gutfeld.
So what was interesting about that is one would expect that if Greg Gutfeld is gonna go off for this like long extended fantasy that he's spinning or whatever with AOC and Matt Gaetz, he's gonna be focusing on AOC, and he did talk about AOC. But he said Matt Gaetz' hairline is weird. He mentioned the fact that he suffered these accusations of sexual misconduct. I feel like this entire thing was less about creating this masturbatory fantasy about AOC and more about just attacking Matt Gaetz. Because he kept throwing him under the bus there.
I know, I'm curious why that is. There must be something at play that we're not privy to. Whatever, I don't get it. But what's also super interesting about this story, and honestly something I would never expect, is that on his podcast, because that's a thing now, members of Congress have their own podcasts. Gaetz took it upon himself to call out Fox and defend AOC.
It does seem a little childish to me that the media always has to over-sexualize everything that AOC is involved with. They wouldn't do that to men, and two people can engage in serious legislation that's not renaming some post office, but trying to make our Congress more honest and more ethical without that type of, I think, very childish and immature commentary. And then Judge Jeanine, who starts out saying, I am happily married. Judge Jeanine, who was sitting at my table at Mar-a-Lago the night I proposed to my wife. By the end of the Greg Gutfeld rant, she's bailed and she's wanting to be the officiant for me and AOC. So shame on you, Judge Jeanine.
So I'm curious what you think. I mean, I do commend him for calling out Gutfeld and Fox for their weird discussion. I commend him for defending AOC and also shedding light, something that I don't expect from most Republican lawmakers, on how differently women are treated versus how men are treated. That was great. Now, we're gonna look into Matt Gaetz's past because he's not really a great arbiter of decent treatment toward women. We'll get to that in just a moment, but John, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm glad especially that he didn't just defend her, but he pointed out that Fox does this, that this is not just a single occurrence that someone is treating a female politician differently, but this is a standard. We expect to see this, and that Fox especially does it, and not just the men on Fox. Many of the women on Fox are active participants in this. They see some temporary gain, I guess, to making light of a popular Democratic lawmaker, and either don't realize or don't care that they're playing into an unequal way that women are treated in politics. That's definitely true. Along the way, it's convenient for them that they sort of distract from the substance, the actual corruption.
Exactly.
Like Greg Gutfeld implied that he agrees with them, but one wouldn't know that from watching that segment. So far as I've seen, he's never gone off on a long rant about this topic. They could use their popular show to continually say we need to get this done if they believe it. So the entire thing was pretty gross. Honestly though, as bad as that was, and it was bad, and I'm glad that he defended him, it's not as bad as some of what they've done on Fox when it comes to AOC. Tucker Carlson was obsessed with her on a nightly basis.
I remember.
He had a little nickname for her. He insisted on calling her Sandy for some weird reason that's best not thought about for too long, considering his obsession with college and high school age girls. It's been very clear. Just constantly talking about Ben Shapiro, obviously, Matt Walsh and Charlie Kirk, all of them are obsessed with her. Greg Gutfeld, I think, is relatively constrained. I think he's just, he's got like an artist's soul wanting to break free, and this is the weird form that it took. Dude, just write fan fiction. You can post it online, you get good feedback.
Yeah, it was
not about AOC, please.
Yeah, it was a weird scenario that he made up in his head and felt the need to share on national television.
It's a French bulldog, not a French poodle.
Oh, did he say French
poodle?
Poodle?
Those mixed up. They're
totally
such different dogs, both good dogs, but
what's a French poodle? It's
a kind of poodle.
Isn't a French poodle just a poodle?
You're probably deeply offending someone right now.
I'm sorry.
I don't know.
If it makes you feel any better, while my dog is mixed, he was a rescue after all. He's mostly mini poodle. But I think
part mini deer, part mini poodle.
Exactly, yes, 100%. Okay, so I do want to just quickly discuss Matt Gaetz's history. Yes, he did face a pretty serious DOJ investigation after being accused of paying an underage girl, she was 17, to travel across state lines to have sex with him. Apparently that investigation was dropped. It didn't lead to any charges. Okay, let's just put that aside. I mean,
because there were no charges, all the stuff that was revealed from the Venmo no longer bothers me, nor should it bother anyone.
I mean, look,
it's probably innocent, the stuff that was in those Venmo messages.
Let's just say Gaetz is well connected, okay? I don't know anything for sure. This is just my opinion, but his father was a well-known lawmaker in Florida. I would not be surprised if some string pulling took place.
Yeah, you're not saying that did happen. You're just saying you wouldn't be surprised.
I'm saying that I think it's very likely, but it's just my opinion. So let's put that aside. The other thing I wanted to just mention, we do have evidence of him being incredibly terrible and disrespectful toward women, including pro-choice activists. So let's show you the receipts on that.
Have you watched these pro-abortion, pro-murder rallies? The people are just disgusting. Like, why is it that the women with the least likelihood of getting pregnant are the ones most worried about having abortions? Nobody wants to impregnate you if you look like a thumb. These people are odious on the inside and out. They're like 5'2", 350 pounds, and they're like, give me my abortions or I'll get up and march and protest. And I'm thinking, march? You look like you got ankles weaker than the legal reasoning behind Roe versus Wade. A few of them need to get up and march. They need to get up and march for like an hour a day, swing those arms, get the blood pumping, maybe mix in a salad.
who knows? Maybe he turned a new leaf. Maybe, but that was not good.
I gave him some credit this morning. What is wrong with me? I completely forgot about that.
I mean,
that was so terrible.
It was bad.
Not, let alone, I mean, you could also say he's one of the most enthusiastic supporters of Donald Trump, a guy who has viciously sexualized, and the way that he talks about women in politics, women anywhere.
You mean the guy who was just found guilty of sexual battery in a civil case?
Yeah. So he defends AOC from Greg Gutfeld, but all of the other women, I guess, can defend themselves.
He defends AOC from Greg Gutfeld when Greg Gutfeld is criticizing AOC and Matt Gaetz.
And him,
right?
yes.
So I think that might have a lot to do with it. But aside from all of that, again, credit where credit is due. I like that he's working on this legislation. That is an upside. I like the fact that he defended AOC. That's another upside in this story. But when people tell you who they are, you should believe it. And I need to see consistent and persistent behavior from Matt Gaetz demonstrating that what he said in defending AOC is something that he actually takes to heart.
Yeah.
So there you have it. All right, we got to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the conspiracy chuds who think that one of the latest mass shootings was some sort of psyop. That and more coming up. Ice cream. Welcome back to the show, everyone. Lots of comments, so many comments. I'm a little overwhelmed by it. The powerful never pay says guys like Santos and Stinky Zinke are not used to paying for their crimes. Let's hope things change this time, but I don't have hope. You should have some hope. I mean, I do think that Santos is going to suffer the consequences, but I think he's going to suffer the consequences precisely because he's a clown and he has relatively little political power.
Agreed.
So you should feel great about that. Frank Rockefeller writes in and says, trade deficits equal foreign investment. Another good reason for the dollar to fail as the world currency of our politicians. Interesting point. Okay, I gotta look into that more. But yes, interesting point. Okay, Jason Ray writes in and says, maybe if US women committed to paying 3 or 4 times what? I'm gonna skip that because I don't know what that means. Locro says, shout out and big thanks to the super mod Adrian Vixen, who's been helping all day.
That's awesome. Thank
Adrian,
you.
Thank you.
Always reliable.
Thank you to all of our mods, okay? Yes. You guys do such an incredible job and an important job that makes the community on all the different platforms we operate on great communities. Like you would not be able to engage with the show if it weren't for the mods.
100%.
Right? All the trolls, all the hate watchers would destroy that experience. Early Bird 42 says Matt Gaetz has a wife. I know, I forgot about that too. What did he get married? What did he get married in Tennessee?
Oh my God.
That's bad. I mean, as a very naughty joke, and I'm supposed to say that it is naughty, but I enjoyed it. Jason Ray says, Jason Ray, you're freaking going nuts with these super chats. Thank you. Gonna call it, there's gonna be more young women's shoes to drop on Gaetz. He's laying groundwork for support. Interesting theory. We'll see.
I think there are simpler explanations. I get the inclination, but I think there's simpler explanations.
Look at John being super fair. All right, Marion D says in our YouTube member section, Anna's right about the negative impact of foreign investment. Don't look to Canada for solutions. What they have done up here is too little. I agree, by the way. I didn't want to go off on a long tangent about Canada, which is why I didn't get into it, but I totally agree with you. What they have done is too little, too late, and largely ineffective. All right, let's go to all of our wonderful new YouTube members. There's Melissa Moldrup. We have Darren Spardello, I like that name, Darren Spardello. Joey Clementi and Early Bird 42 who gifted 1 TYT membership. Thank you so much for that. All right, let's get back to the show. Viewers wrote in and said that throwing Cenk under the bus is like a Wednesday pastime of ours.
That and ice cream.
True. We love Cenk and we never mean to throw him under the bus. He's the best. Anyway, all right, I wanted to also read a quick comment from Crystal in our YouTube members section. By the way, you can become a member by going to tyt.com/join, or as Crystal did, just click on that join button if you're watching us on YouTube. Property is also a really easy way to launder money because we literally have no safeguards. You're absolutely right about that. In fact, it's interesting because Democrats seem to have an issue with Russian oligarchs laundering money and using their influence against Donald Trump when they overpaid for a Trump-related property. But all of a sudden, when it impacts ordinary people, foreign investment, totally fine. What's the problem? Anyway. All right, let's get back to the show and some of the stories we have for you, including the latest weird conspiracy discourse happening on the right.
Revealed, Texas gunman staked out massacre mall to monitor peak times 3 weeks before killing 8 and posted details on Russian social media alongside photos of Nazis, guns, and ammunition. You see, here's where we get into the psyop.
Tim Pool, along with other right-wing media figures, seem to have all these crazy theories about one of the latest gunmen who carried out a mass shooting, this time in Texas. So this was the Texas mass shooting that happened last weekend. And we have learned a lot about the shooter over the last few days. Authorities have confirmed that he did, in fact, espouse white supremacist and Nazi views, and also hinted at his plans to carry out a mass shooting ahead of time. Now, right-wingers, though, don't like the fact that he's been associated with the right wing, and so Tim Pool and Elon Musk have apparently spread the week, spreading some disinformation that we should get into, okay? And let me just be clear. The one thing that connects all the mass shootings in the country, regardless of what motivated the shooting, is the easy access to guns. So I guess the right wing is worried that this makes them look bad, but I would venture to say that what actually makes them look bad is their unwillingness to ever support even the most mild gun reform policy. But let's get back, or both, exactly. So let's get back to the story at hand. Now, before we get to their conspiracy theories and lies, here's a more accurate description of the Texas gunman.
Troubling details emerging about 33-year-old Mauricio Garcia. One patch on Garcia's vest used by far-right extremist groups, leading investigators to a disturbing online history on a Russian social networking site, where Garcia shared pictures of the Allen Premium outlets where the attack took place. Then on April 22nd, this photo, appearing to show the 33-year-old shirtless with multiple Nazi-inspired tattoos just 2 weeks before the shooting.
Gee, I wonder if we can confirm what the ideological leanings of this gunman happen to be. Anyway, John, before I go on, I'm curious what you have to say so far.
Yeah, look, the right is going to be defensive, obviously. It's a mass shooting. We all get worked up when a mass shooting happens. Some of us get worked up because we hate the senseless loss of life and don't want to see more of it. Others get worked up because they want to protect their guns. He's getting particularly defensive because, of course, this guy apparently liked his content or posted about him. I don't even know how extensive it was. It's not like they've shown that he was like a regular viewer or anything like that, but his name came up, so he's gonna be defensive about it. And there are probably a lot of people out there that think, well, okay, so you have Tim Pool who's gonna unveil how this is a psyop, and they might think, well, I wanna get involved in this sort of stuff, but I'm not a Sherlock Holmes level detective like Tim Pool. How do I figure out what's a psyop or not? And it's actually pretty simple. If a shooter does their thing and there's no details about their politics, but they're clearly obsessed with guns, then we can't speculate about their politics, don't say anything. If there's a little bit of evidence that they're a right winger, then that's not conclusive, you really shouldn't bring up at all. If there's a lot of evidence, well, then the CIA did a psyop. It's really as simple as that. It's a perfect 3-tier plan for figuring out what was behind a shooting.
And mind you, as we engage in this ridiculous discourse about the shooter, it takes away, I believe it takes away from the conversation that actually needs to be had in regard to what can we do to either mitigate mass shootings in this country or prevent mass shootings in this country. But like, you're right, I think that Tim Pool is defensive right now because, there's some reporting indicating that the gunman was a fan of Tim Pool. I don't care, right? Like, we don't need to immediately go to politicizing the situation in that way. I don't know. Anyway, let's also go to some more detail about the shooter before we get to Elon Musk as well, because while it was clear that he opened fire and started shooting at people at random, like he didn't just target people of color or whatever, he was just shooting people randomly. Investigators or investigations into his social media postings did show that he had ties to right-wing extremism. So for instance, let's go to the Texas Department of Public Safety Regional Director Hank Sibley confirming this during a press conference.
We do know that he had neo-Nazi ideation. He had patches, he had tattoos, even his signature, verified that. That's one thing we do know.
Wow, that sheriff must be super woke. He must be a Bernie supporter, must be a member of the Democratic Socialists of America, except he's not.
Hippie ass cowboy.
Yeah, so he allegedly praised Chaya Raichik of Libs of TikTok. So just let that sink in. That guy that you just heard
and
from.
Nick Fuentes.
He's not some left winger.
Oh, no, that guy didn't praise them.
Oh,
the
okay.
shooter praised
the
Tim Pool,
shooter.
Libs
Got
of
it.
TikTok, and Nick Fuentes.
Okay, but either way, the guy you just heard from, not a leftist, not someone who's like on the warpath against Tim Pool. I'm just saying. Now, yes, you're right. Garcia praised, Libs of TikTok and Tim Pool. Other posts praised Nazis and the Chilean dictator Pinochet. Okay, he directly addressed his ethnic background in one meme he posted, which mentioned Latino children and the phrase become white supremacist. Okay, it's just clear who he is. Like, let's move on, right?
It's becoming too clear though. It's making me think that the FBI did it.
There's
too much evidence.
There's too much evidence, okay? According to the US Defense Department, the suspect entered the Army in June of 2008 and was terminated 3 months later without completing initial entry training because of physical or mental conditions. So there was that. The shooter had also legally bought 8 weapons, including the AR-15 that he used in the mass shooting. He also had 3 firearms that were found in his possession, while another 5 were in his car. Okay, so let's get back to the conspiracy theories. So we have all these facts about this guy. And since right-wingers are uncomfortable with who this guy really was and what his political ideology was, they started questioning the reporting and questioning his real ideology, okay? To get to Elon, we first have to start with right-wing weirdo Ian Miles Chong, who posted this tweet questioning damning information about the shooter. So he writes, the alleged shooter's alleged profile claims that he was inspired by libs of TikTok. Between this and the Tim Pool references, this thing is suspect. By the way, did anyone actually allege that the shooter was inspired by libs of TikTok?
I don't know.
No one alleged that. But anyway, between this and the Tim Pool references, this thing is suspect. Where is his Twitter account? Why was he using a Russian social media site to write what was essentially a diary to 0 followers?
I love the logic behind every sentence of that.
So now the right wing's blaming Russia?
Yeah, no. They're saying, yeah, no, we get it. Maybe you'll have a Russian blog about how you're gonna kill people, but like, you don't have any fans? Come on, are we really gonna trust you if you didn't have a lot of premium subscribers?
You don't even have a Twitter account?
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, well also, between libs of TikTok and Tim Pool, this thing is suspect. That is literally the thought process. Oh, he likes 2 of us. I'm suspicious. He's not laying out why that should be suspicious to anyone who's not a right-wing grifter. He's just stating that it is because it references 2 right-wing grifters.
So a woman with the Twitter handle Redheaded Libertarian quote tweeted it and said this, it's a psyop and it's not even good. And that's where Elon Musk comes in and says this gets weirder by the moment. Does it really?
Does it get weirder?
Does it get weirder by the moment?
Or does it get very, very understandable and sort of the experience we've had with many killers in the past? It seems like a crazy person who believed right-wing BS, loved guns, and decided to kill people after posting about it online. Now, I know that sounds out there. You're probably thinking, did ChatGPT just come up with that? Because no human mind could have conceived of such a bizarre plot. But no, it reminds me of a few guys over the past few years, actually.
Like who?
Other mass shooters that are very similar to this guy that he probably patterned himself after.
Maybe they're getting defensive because of that pattern.
Probably, or the fact that they were referenced. And again, Chaya Raichik isn't responsible for this. Tim Pool is not responsible for this. I mean, they do now, again, are reminded that these are people who like them. And when they demonize people, when they casually imply that violence might be fun and justified in politics, they know who they're appealing to and they can go forward with that knowledge and do what they're gonna do. And then convince themselves that they're still good members of their faith or whatever.
Yeah,
that doesn't mean they're individually responsible.
I agree, yeah, I agree with your take 100%. Like, I do think that as public figures who tend to have massive audiences or a huge number of followers, maybe be a little considerate in regard to the type of rhetoric you engage in, like calling for civil war and stuff like that. Not a good idea when we're in a country that's full of, honestly, undiagnosed and untreated mentally ill people.
Which they say.
Right, which
they talk about that constantly.
Right. And who have easy access to weapons of death, like weapons that cause death, mass death in many cases. Like, that's all I'm saying. But to place blame on Tim Pool or Chaya Raichik, regardless of what you think about them, for this shooting is ridiculous. And I think that's why Tim Pool is defensive. So let's get back to that. Let's get back to Tim Pool. So Pool has cited multiple times. Okay, so Tim Pool was cited multiple times in the shooter's online social media posts. And so Tim Pool chimed in to agree that this is a psyop. Okay, anyway, let's watch.
You see, here's where we get into the psyop. No one knows if this Russian social media profile it actually belongs to this guy. I mean, I gotta be honest, I think it's funny and I really just don't care. I think we've won so much ground in the culture war that it is completely meaningless that they would even do it, assuming it was a psyop. It means nothing to me. It's just funny.
I think he's being honest. I think he is in the wake of this terrible mass killing and it means nothing to him. None of this means anything. He has a gun behind him in his shot. He knows who he's trying to appeal to. He knows who he's desperately trying to convince that he's an alpha male or whatever. He knows all this. Again, not individually responsible, but responsible for what you do, responsible for what you say, and the people you appeal to.
I don't care at all who this mass shooter liked to watch and support during his free time. I just don't care. I don't care if it's Tim Pool. I don't care if he was loving Chaya Raichik's content. What I care about is that this is a guy who had easy access to weapons and carried out a horrendous, terrible, tragic mass shooting that claimed the lives of innocent individuals while they were out shopping on a Saturday.
Yeah.
And what I care about is that this keeps happening again and again and again. But making this about you because you want to get super defensive over what the investigation is finding, I think is just so ridiculous. And minimizing it by trying to pretend as if this is nothing more than a psyop is also pretty gross. But we're not done yet. So he thinks it's a psyop, but he also points that shootings like this happen because of multiculturalism.
We don't want these things to happen. We want these things to stop. We need to figure out what the issue is in our society, in our culture. And I'll put it simply, I think it's multiculturalism. And not the idea that people of all different types are holding hands on the rainbow. It's that you have different communities stacked on top of each other and next to each other with wildly different views, and they don't like each other. And then people who are crazy will do crazy things.
Wow. So we just experienced another mass shooting in the country by a guy who had a Nazi, like a swastika tattooed on his body. And your takeaway from this whole incident, this whole situation is, I think mass shootings happen because of multiculturalism. That's the real problem. The country's too diverse. So what do you intend to do about that, Tim Pool? What's your solution?
I think I know what his solution is, specifically to that.
Man, he freaking fell off big time. He went from being like, I know we've said this before, but this is what money does to people, man. Like he went from being an Occupy Wall Street reporter who complained about police brutality because he was brutalized by the cops, to now being like the golden boy for anti-multiculturalism garbage.
Yeah, the same as all of the others. He is exactly the same as all of the others. If it makes you feel better in trying to understand the arc, and bear in mind, I don't follow his career now. I didn't follow it then. He probably didn't really believe it back then.
No, probably
He probably was chasing money and fame the same way he is now. He just thought he could get it from the left then, and now he thinks he can get it from the right. And he's onto something because there's way more money on the right. His solution, by the way, to the multiculturalism, he's right to point out that there's a lot of people who are really angry about race because of people like him that are trying to make them angry about issues of race and hate everyone else.
Who's amping them up?
Yeah. Oh, I wonder why some people hate trans people. I wonder why. I wonder what sort of content they might be watching. I wonder.
And it is interesting how when we experienced a mass shooting carried out by a transgender individual, they were ready to take the guns away from specifically transgender people in America, right? They were ready and willing to believe the reporting on that, on the identity of that shooter. But once
seems like a psyop to me.
Seems like a psyop. Can you imagine if we did that? If we came on the show and said, no, we think this is a psyop. We think the conservatives in government are making this up. And they might be bribing journalists to make this up. That's what's happening. I mean, we would sound like lunatics because that's what lunatics would think. But they can't see past their own lunacy. It's pretty incredible. Anyway, we gotta take a break. When we come back, Marsha Blackburn is a moron, and we'll show you why.
Ice cream.
yeah, Bart. Thanks for letting it drop. All right, what's up, guys? Welcome to our final social break of the day. I'm gonna do a rapid fire round, starting with Kevin Eller in our members section, who says, love you, Anna, keep up the great work. You, Cenk, and the TYT Army are the best I've found, and I'm so thankful. Kevin has been a member for 30 months.
Damn.
And we're so grateful for you. Thank you for watching the show and supporting what we do. Brandon Young Kemkes writes in and says, thanks for keeping us informed and keeping it fun.
We're trying.
Ambassadors of fun here at TYT. Thank you very much.
We only got that position because we donated a lot. That's all. That's how it works.
A lot of topics covered on news usually don't allow for this, but you guys always find a way. Thank you. Woke Dragon says, are you broke? Because I heard that if you go woke, you go broke. I'm just kidding.
Can Ahmad change their name to Broke Dragon, please?
The Broke Dragon. Anyway, it's Wednesday. Time to find out why we can't buy a house in America. That was excellent.
Set your clocks, people.
All right, I'll diversify the content in the first hour on Wednesdays. Apologies.
I'll fact check that in a week.
Kelly writes in, it says, I'm a member from Canada and I love your reactions to the nonsense that happens every day. Anna for Congress, yay. Thanks. Usually my reactions are depression, but I'm glad you enjoy it. We've got Jonathan Davis who says, how do we, the people, get these people out of the highest court? That is a tough question, and I do not have an answer for you. You would actually need members of Congress. I mean, you would have to impeach Supreme Court justices, and the process is very similar to how you would impeach the president. So you would have the House convict on charges, but then you would need the Senate the House to bring up charges and then the Senate to convict. And you would need a 2/3 majority for that. It would be incredibly difficult to do. So it's hard to do away with Supreme Court justices. And the idea of packing the courts is laughable. You would need strong Democrats to do that, and they're not willing to. So yeah, we're in a tough pickle when it comes to the Supreme Court. Irene writes in and says, of the whole George Santos, Harlan Crow corruption stories, that this is banana republic stuff. Yep, you're exactly right. And we are out of time. So let's get back to the show. We've got a lot more to get into.
Ice cream. Ice cream.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. Just want to read a quick super chat from Peter Wilkes about BRICS. So the comment is that the United States is losing reserve currency status. Saudis signed deal with BRICS, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, South America, to trade oil outside of US currency. You're concerned about that. I hear your concerns. So just want to make a note to my team to look into covering BRICS, very likely next Wednesday. That sounds like a doozy of a story, and I want to do a deep dive on it. But thank you for that suggestion, and thank you for being a member for 2 years. With that said, let's get to this Marsha Blackburn story.
To have this grant pool and to allow local school systems and local law enforcement to work together to bring in veterans and retired law enforcement to serve as a security officer at a school. They know how to use weapons. They know how to de-escalate situations. I've talked to a lot of them. They like this idea. They are grandparents like we are. My husband and I are grandparents, and they want to be there to help protect children.
That was Senator Marsha Blackburn, and you heard her correctly. She is advocating for arming grandparents to mitigate the number of deaths that occur in the endless mass shootings we experience in this country. She also seems to forget that there have been a lot of mass shootings where armed guards and armed resource officers are present, and the mass shooter is still able to gun down and kill many people anyway. In fact, Uvalde is a perfect example where there are there's an endless supply of law enforcement from various different departments there, and it takes them an incredibly long time to even act. So if the idea here is, no, we just need to respond to armed mass shooters with more armed people, that hasn't worked. So what are you talking about? And why are we gonna put the onus on grandparents to save these kids? I just want to live somewhere else, but I don't know where. I just don't know where. Every place has its issues, and like, there's nowhere to go. There's no place for refuge. It's insane.
Yeah, I think the issue with your example is that in Uvalde, you had a couple hundred trained cops. What you needed was Grandpa Joe. Then they would have been able to stop. It's the stupidest idea. No, it's not the stupidest idea. I think the not having side doors to buildings anymore is stupider. But look, if she actually talked to grandparents and they want to stand between second graders and a rampaging maniac with an AR-15, then that is brave of them. It also implies, I'm not gonna speak for every one of these grandparents, that they want to stand between the kids and the maniac, which requires that they want the maniac to still be able to get the gun.
Exactly.
They're willing to engage in assault rifle combat before they're willing to just not have the fight happen in the first place. They would rather potentially have their own head blown off than have it so that the next mass shooter can't buy the weapon that will blow their head off. You could just not have this at all. We could join the community of nations around the world that does not routinely have to deal with this. That's a different way to go.
We keep experiencing mass shootings where there are good guys with guns on the scene, and it does nothing to stop the insane number of people who die in this country as a result of these mass shootings, but they keep making the same talking points anyway. It's just insanity, it's total insanity, and it makes it impossible to ever engage in discourse in this country that actually leads to something substantive. Now, we're gonna explain why that is in just a moment, and it has something to do with Marsha Blackburn's donors, of course. But first, I wanted to talk a little bit about Marsha Blackburn accusing the Biden administration of being hypocrites, because her claim here is, the Biden administration, the White House, they've got a ton of security, right? And yet, the Biden administration and Democrats are not supportive of proposals that I'm putting out there. So what is her proposal? Let's talk about that a little bit. So it's called the Safe Schools Act, and it would appropriate $900 million to be distributed to private and public schools. The funding would be used to train veterans. You mean veterans who aren't even getting the proper mental health care they need as they're suffering from PTSD as a result of the multiple deployments that they experience in the Middle East? Is that those veterans? Okay, great. Let's continue. Or former law enforcement officers to become school safety officers. Schools could also use the funding to purchase metal detectors, X-ray machines, bulletproof glass, and other pretty insane measures, because why wouldn't we want to make our schools feel like you're in the airport? I mean, Are we gonna fondle the kids too as they're walking through the metal detectors? Let's watch Marsha Blackburn and McEnany talk about this.
I seem to remember a lot of security each time that I walked into the White House for work. Armed Secret Service, dogs, metal detectors. In fact, there's an armed Secret Service officer just steps away from the press secretary's office. I would know, I sat there. But that's the place where Karine Jean-Pierre works. It's impenetrable. What possible reason could you have for not protecting our children, our true diamonds? Joining me now is Tennessee Senator Marsha Blackburn. What is your dealings with President Biden, and why would he reject this?
It is just unseemly that there would be such a rejection of this by the Democrats. Everybody should be for the Safe School Act, Kayleigh. They should want to do this tomorrow, as you were saying, to keep our children safe. This is something I have worked on since 2018. Tried to get it passed then, tried to get it passed last year after the Uvalde shootings.
So why is it that Marsha Blackburn wants to arm veterans and retired police officers to allegedly protect our kids when, again, I'm gonna repeat for the billionth time, there are endless examples of good guys with guns on the scene who were unable to stop the bad guy with the gun who carries out the mass shooting? Well, it could have something to do with the fact that Marsha Blackburn knows who butters her bread. Okay, so let's take a look at Open Secrets and what they have reported in regard to her campaign contributions. Oh, would you look at that? A lot of money coming in from gun manufacturing. A lot of money coming in from these organizations.
Wow.
So we can see just how much money gun rights and gun manufacturing organizations spend on lobbying overall compared to gun control organizations. Okay, so this isn't just about Marsha Blackburn. This is spending by the gun lobby in general. So in 2022, when it comes to gun control, it's only like $1.77 million, right? But you look at the gun manufacturers and gun rights activists, it's a lot more money.
Yeah.
So $8.5 million from gun rights lobbyists, 2.3 from gun manufacturing lobbying, and that's in 2022 alone. And the list goes on and on. It's the money, it's the money. Gun rights interests gave more than $75.1 million to federal candidates, parties, and outside spending groups from 1989 through the third quarter of 2022, with 90% of the funds contributed to candidates and parties going to Republicans. The NRA is consistently the top contributing organization among gun rights groups. So this isn't surprising. They just do what their donors want them to do, including embarrassing themselves on national TV by regurgitating talking points that make no sense given what we've experienced with mass shootings in this country.
Yep, 100%. And they don't, the fact that it doesn't make sense doesn't matter. Like you can continually point out that schools are gun-free zones in other countries, doesn't result in the kids constantly being gunned down. Like it doesn't matter. You can point out all this stuff, doesn't matter. We're gonna solve all of our problems by leaving the guns alone. They're the best things ever. They're more important than you. They're more important than the diamonds that are our children. You just gotta get Grandpa. Grandpa Joe's gonna stand in front of the building and that'll save us. Or more likely, Grandpa Joe will get shot first. I personally see this bill as the shoot Grandpa first bill. That's what it is. You shoot the grandpa and then you massacre through the school. That's what it's going to be. Because Grandpa has to defend an entire building, whereas the terrorist can watch it for a few days and figure out where Grandpa stands. That's pretty much how this works. In all of these cases, you just have to ask, what is the most you're willing to do to stop this from happening? And Marsha Blackburn, Kayleigh McEnany have a line. Oh, these children they're precious, they're diamonds, but they will not stop people from buying these guns.
Yeah,
they're perfectly comfortable with the next psycho being able to waltz into a store, plop down $750, probably on credit, and buy a weapon that can kill an entire classroom of third graders.
They
will not stop that.
I mean, as long as the gun lobby is bribing them. I am very curious.
I don't even think that's necessary. I think that was necessary. I don't think it's necessary anymore. I think it is just such a core political topic for the right that they have to say you have a right to these weapons. Even if they were making no money whatsoever. I think that if they say, you know what, AR-15s are too much, you can't have them, or even you have to wait until you're 21, I think they will be beat in the next primary by a Republican who will say the opposite. I could be wrong, we disagree, but that's.
I mean, it's interesting. I am curious to see how that would play out because you look at the polling. I mean, Fox News just did a poll that showed the vast majority of Americans, and I'm not talking about like, 55% of Americans. I'm talking about in the 70s and 80s, they want common sense gun legislation. In fact, one of the questions in that Fox News poll was, like basically, how do you want to respond to the mass shootings? Do you want more people to be armed with firearms? Only 45% of respondents said yes. So they are going against the will of their own voters in pushing for loosening gun laws.
But not necessarily the primary voters in some of these areas, which are skewed. Look, I'm sure it's a mix of a lot of different things. The fact that they'd be attacked by right-wing media, the fact, like there's a lot of different things, but I just don't think, considering the huge amounts of money that they bring in, Marsha Blackburn getting $200,000 a cycle, I don't think is singularly enough for her to hold this position, is all. It could be a contributing factor.
Well,
anyway, the end result is that they're fine with people being able to buy these guns and mow down kids.
That's exactly right. And you heard it here first, folks. John does not think that corruption by the gun lobby really matters. In fact, he favors it. In fact, him working here might be a psyop.
You know what? I was gonna say that what I was hearing was a psyop, but she claimed it first, so ergo she wins.
All right, let's move on. Let's lighten things up with a rare appearance by Dark Brandon. So we're all supposed to pretend like we're at the edge of our seats over this debt ceiling issue. Oh, are they gonna lift the debt ceiling? What's gonna happen? Should Biden negotiate with the Republican Party in cutting incredibly important social spending bills? Yeah, okay, I'm not worried. They're gonna vote to lift the debt ceiling because they have to. If they don't, the world economy collapses. And so do the stock portfolios of all these lawmakers who are engaging in this ridiculous theater. But with that said, during a recent press conference, President Joe Biden was asked about House Speaker Kevin McCarthy and whether he is willing to negotiate with congressional Republicans in cutting spending in order to lift the debt ceiling. Let's watch.
Speaker McCarthy said that he asked you numerous times if there was anywhere in the federal budget for cuts, but he did not get an answer. So is there?
I got a specific answer. Got a specific answer again today.
Which is what?
The first, you didn't listen either, so why should I even answer the question? We cut the deficit by $160 billion, B-I-L-L-I-O-N, dollars on the Medicare deal. We cut the deficit by raising the tax on people making 55 corporations that made $40 billion to 15%, and the list goes on. So,
but in terms of what he is proposing, is there any room for negotiation?
What's he proposing? Did he tell you?
Well,
Did you
he
hear?
talked about.
No, I'm not being facetious. Did he tell you what he's proposing?
He was talking about the bill.
Yeah, but what does it propose? Do you know? I'm not being a wise guy. You all are very, very informed people. Do you know what that bill cuts?
There is a long list of things that it cuts. That
No, it doesn't say. It says, does it say what it's going to cut? Or just say generically it's going to cut? You get the problem.
Damn. There are very few things that Biden does well, or very few moments that show Biden handling a situation well. I think that's a good example of it. I think the way
when he successfully spelled billion, I thought he handled that pretty well.
I thought so too, but no,
fast too.
But to be fair, I mean, turning around and asking the reporter to specify what the Republicans want to cut, that was pretty awesome.
Well, because by not doing that, by just implying that they are being specific, you are, and I don't know who said that. I'm not saying that intentionally.
Who the reporter is. I don't care.
You're doing PR work for the Republicans, effectively.
100%.
You may not intend to, but that is what you're doing.
That's exactly right.
That said, I didn't like the first thing he said. I found that to be needlessly combative and disrespectful. No, I meant when he's like, well, you weren't paying attention, so why should I answer that? He was doing his jokey thing, but it struck me as a little bit Trump-like. I think it was just the tone was wrong. The other stuff he said was better. And I like that he was able to diagnose what she's doing in real time. And like often you'll have like Lauren Boebert who will try to do something. We're like, yeah, well, what's in it? But people know and they'll just say, but he was right, which is an important part of having a good moment. You weren't a clown who was unprepared.
It reminds me of the House hearing. I forget the context at this point because the only takeaway was how obsessive Lauren Boebert was on asking about urine.
And she was like, "Did you like vote to stop it or whatever?" And he was like, "Yes." And she was like,
"Urination in public."
Like, "What? No, but but did you vote to stop it?" Yes. It's ridiculous. She's terrible at this.
God, can we bring
Biden
that back?
did a good job.
Let's bring that back.
Oh my God.
For the bonus episode for our members, tyt.com/join.
Okay.
I loved that video. It killed me. Anyway, back to this story. Okay, so I hear you. I was fine with Joe Biden getting a little snippy with the reporter only because it's rare. With Donald Trump, he attacked the press all day, every day, and it wasn't justified. He would attack the press because they would accurately report about his wrongdoing. In this case, I think, look, the one thing that you have to understand is that Biden is old. And old people tend to get irritable easily, they get grumpy easily. It's actually shocking how little we see of that side of him. Oh, when I'm 80, if I, God willing, make it to that age, I'm just gonna be openly grumpy all the time. I can't wait, it's gonna be the best thing in the world. But anyway, I think it's good when Biden is willing to cut through the BS from the right wing. That was a decent example of it, so I will allow it. Bonus episode is next, tyt.com/join.
Our audience has given us everything, so we couldn't be more connected. When we first started, people would start giving us directions and say, okay, the mics are too large, move them. Turn them into lav mics. I mean, they were incredible. And then one guy walked in and gave us a really expensive switcher and said, you guys need this, and walked out. Okay, it's amazing. They helped us build a studio. They did a $2 million funding campaign for us. And so